Besides foresight, poor eyesight, couldn't fist fight, had to overcompensate. Learn to be clairvoyant, see around corners, read signals and warnings, interpret omens, respond accordingly to the...
Broadcast from later, live from the Hyper-President, Udit Veer, Valdez Sillins, Asia Clark, myself, Robert Bolton, and our guest, time traveler / foresight strategist, Trevor Haldenby. Weak signals are things that we notice on the peripheries of our radars that we don't really understand yet. And on broadcasts like this one, we try to figure out what they might mean and how they might change systems in the future. So Asia, what's your weakest signal?
Did you guys know that Donald Trump is not the only president that is out here pushing a cure for COVID-19 that has not been regulated by the World Health Organization? This one is the president of Madagascar. His name is Andry Rajoelina. And for some reason, he's really pushing this brand that comes from his country called COVID Organics. And a lot of countries are like buying into it. And obviously it has not been tested yet, but he's like going on the world stage and doing interviews and talking about how this is a miracle cure. And obviously, why would you try something that hasn't been tested? However, I think it is actually kind of interesting that an organic or like a traditional medicine cure to COVID-19 is being talked about in these media outlets. It's nice to know that, you know, a president is pushing something that's plant-based or organic or a traditional medicine, even if it hasn't been tested.
What is it? Which of those is it? What's the...
It's supposed to be a traditional medicine from Madagascar that they're like pushing as COVID organics.
Well, maybe it's actually the cure, and that would be a pretty good kickstart to conserve what's left of the Malagasy ecosystem. Presumably, if it's coming from the forest, it's coming from a forest that's about to be cut down.
That's exactly what I was going to get at. Or our thirst to survive this pandemic as, you know, a collective society takes down the last trees on Earth.
Or that, yeah.
Anyway, the fact that it's a cure could be the thing that causes it to be turned into a plantation and completely disrupted too, right? It's like the thing that pushes it over the edge.
So in terms of, there's a few things this could signal, but what are you thinking of first?
I think that it signals people's willingness to try something that is not from big pharma, at least on the African continent. Like, people are really talking about it in these random rabbit holes that I'm down. And then obviously there's people who are like, why would you try anything that hasn't necessarily been tested? But all those commercials that you hear at night being like, did you try this medicine for your leaky gut? It has been recalled. So, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there needs to be room and space for traditional medicines in the conversations about holistic health even, or surviving a pandemic.
What is it a cure for if it's been used before?
All I know is that it's a traditional medicine.
Is it a WebMD page?
I haven't seen it on WebMD. I saw it on Washington Post. But somehow it's the most reputable news source by Western terms that is talking about the president of Madagascar's. You know what I mean?
Right,
this has been talked about on like Africa World News websites and stuff like that for the past month or more. But now it's just getting to like, Donald Trump's not the only crazy one, guys. But is Andry Rajoelina, is he really crazy? I'm not sure.
I mean, if it's traditional medicine and it has been used for a long time, then it probably isn't that dangerous. The question is really like, why would you try it? It's more like, why wouldn't you try it?
Psychonauts of the world have been trying lots of things. I'm eagerly hoping one day for this is a terrible thing to say, but as the guy with the twinkly glasses, I guess I'll just run with it.
Yeah.
I would like one day for there to be a virus or a bacterial infection or a parasitological epidemiology that the vaccine necessarily has psychoactive effects. I would like that. I think that would be a nice thing for humanity to do, to be like, okay, guys, we got to suck it up. We got to get 6 billion people tripping a little bit and healthy. And we'll be like, okay, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? And then we finally get the thing. The summer of love follows through and we get the whole world on one trip together. It's the glasses talking, sorry.
Isn't it that the medicine that you take for malaria is actually quite psychoactive?
It's not the most widely prescribed anymore, but it was for a time, and particularly in the military. In the U.S. military, it was their go-to. Strong, like hallucination and disassociation and depersonalization and
suicidal ideation.
Yeah, lots of insomnia and waking dreams and stuff. Not great for people with automatic weapons.
I was going to say.
Not great.
It kind of explains, no shade, but American soldiers be a little weird sometimes.
Yeah.
Anywho.
Signal or noise, Udit?
It's interesting. I don't know what it's a signal of.
Is this a signal or part of a larger trend of like Malagasy independence? or significance? That like Madagascar's got the vaccine and continental Africa doesn't?
No, I'd say that Africa has the vaccine and the rest of the world doesn't. I think that that's what the Madagascar president is trying to put forward as an ideology, as a Pan-Africanist ideology.
Yeah.
But I think at least what it signals to me is people's willingness to not fuck with big pharma. Like, who the fuck wants a vaccine, really? And another thing, all these anti-vaxxers, everybody's looking at these people like they're crazy. For all these years, being like, these people who don't vaccine their kids, like give everybody the measles in like upstate New York or something like that. But like, would you guys take a COVID vaccine right now?
There isn't one right now.
There isn't one, but
and there won't be one for us until people ahead of us have already asked and been scrutinized on their answers to that question.
So you don't have an answer to the question?
Once they get through it, yeah, for sure I'll take one. I want the fucking Bill Gates microchip, all right? How else am I going to get that microchip? I'm going to have to pay like $2,500 for it. I want the damn microchip, so I'm getting the vaccine.
Tell me how it goes.
Yeah, I'll let you know what a limitless wealth of infinitely and instantly accessible knowledge is like in Bill Gates' voice in my ear 24 hours a day. I'm sure
it's like an
terrible.
acid trip to me.
It does. Well, this is the thing. When we're all getting vaccinated, we're not going to know. 99% of the world's population are not going to know what's real and what's trip.
Oh, man.
And so that's the moment. It's the moment where we all not only have to have the experience, but we all have to live with uncertainty for whatever, the 30 to 200 minutes, where we don't know. You don't know what's real and what's not real. And everyone will have had that experience with the microchip.
I already don't.
So the microchip is like equatable to the tablet acid at this point.
What I want before I die is like narratively configurable brain drugs. So I want to live in a movie. I want to live in Jurassic Park for 3 days. I want to have that experience. And effectively that can come on and work basically just like a mushroom experience or an acid trip in some ways, like evocation of patterns in a landscape along with some like sort of game design principles of like, you want people to see enough of a level, but fill in the gaps themselves.
I like this idea. You wrote a sort of design fiction essay in collaboration with Stuart Kennedy, and my favorite design fiction is a self-exemplifying history of design fictions because the timeline goes into the future. And my favorite one was fortune cookies that induce dreams.
Yeah, where the fortune actually gets in your head and manipulates you to the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, so this is not a new idea for Trevor. So I'm going to take that as a signal. About this signal or noise.
To go back to this dream idea, it reminds me, I was reading about like the history of Maoism last week, totally randomly. It turns out that all of this like CIA paranoia over brainwashing and then the resulting flood in funding for psychedelics in the 50s and 60s like came from this paranoia around the spread of communism and also like this idea that you could brainwash. So Trevor, when you were talking just now, I was
that politics is a kind of drug. It is the opiate of the masses. Or religion, politics, whatever you want.
And that future sounds like the kind of future that these paranoid CIA people were trying to imagine in the 50s of just like being able to reprogram narratively people's brains, right?
Yeah, everything that it's either want or don't want is what the CIA either wanted or didn't want in 1954 or something. But I never quite know if I want what they want or the opposite of it.
That'd be a great political plank, a little political party. CIA 1954. Asia, to jump on like the things you were saying though, like I've read about that drug in Madagascar, and I don't think the president's positioning it as like a traditional in the same way that you're talking about it, because he's like down for testing through the mechanisms that quote big pharma uses. Like he wants randomized control trials. He wants it to be put at the same level that any big pharma would be.
Vetting standards.
Yeah, vetting standards. Like he's not just like, just take whatever. I have a different interpretation of how it might be a signal, I guess, respond to this traditional, non-traditional.
As far as I understand, like traditional medicine in African contexts, the extent to which they have to be legitimized by the Western world is problematic. So I feel like maybe he's doing that in order to be able to have people see from that perspective that this is actually useful. But most of the traditional medicines that people use when I was living in Ghana, there's no clinical trials of that type of stuff. I'm not saying that there's none, but that's not the conversations that they're having. Like, it's been used for generations. They don't need to go to the World Health Organization to prove it to anybody. But I see your point too.
I think for me, the signal then would become the fact that he is like championing it, and they're like taking control of like existing knowledge and resources that they already have to like leverage that innovation into a commercially successful application is like a huge thing, right? Because typically the whole developmental model of how people think of like the entire sub-Saharan African region is that it's just the end point of some just value-added supply chain. Yeah, exactly. And so that I think is huge. Like that's a different, a reversal, becoming like a hotbed of innovation on top of like apparently Senegal and Ghana are doing very well with COVID as well.
Yeah. Wish I was there.
I've heard from you that they were quick to adopt freedom, limiting health surveillance, basically like bouncers with thermometers to go into the grocery store.
Yeah, they were doing that. But they eased all those restrictions a couple of weeks ago. Like they're still not having parties, but because it's such an informal economy, people live hand to mouth a lot. So it's just not practical for businesses and to close or like to expect people to be indoors. Like most market women are selling on the side of the road every day, and what they sell, what they make is how they feed their kids that very same night. So it's impractical to ask these communities to act in the same ways. And then the other thing too was that they were saying like, oh yeah, wash your hands with running water. And so a lot of people don't have running water in these places, right? So I'm actually so happy and proud that, like for example, Ghana's has maybe 6,000 or 7,000 cases, but very, very little deaths. Right. I think the least deaths per cases in the world is in Ghana or something like that, or at least in Africa is in Ghana. So maybe those traditional medicines, and that's that on that.
Yeah. We'll never know if we don't test them through the WHO.
Ain't that a Western truth?
I'm going to say signal. I think for me, the other aspect is just this like over-reliance of pharma, and there's so much evidence that there are lots of regions in the world where you don't rely on pharma as much, and mostly ends up with people being stronger. And especially I think diet is the other thing, where it's like having just real food to eat, and seems to make quite a big difference. And I would say North America is probably the place where you're having some of the worst input for a lot of people. Arguable, but did everybody give their 2 cents on signal or noise there?
I'd say signal.
Seems like a signal across the board. Lots to signal here. Trevor, why don't you go ahead and deliver your signal to us?
So before we started recording, I gave a little bit of a preface that this is maybe somewhere, as I said, I didn't watch the show before coming on the show, and I like to experience things this way the first time. So where my thing lies on the spectrum of legitimate signal to not even noise, but like bananas conspiracy theory, we'll see. Time will tell. Time will prove me right or wrong.
Signal something.
Time will prove me right or wrong. So a couple of months ago, I was reading about atmospheric chemistry, because what else are you going to do? In these times, I feel like reading about atmospheric chemistry is kind of like landscape poetry, because that's the landscape of ours that's going through all the crazy transformative stuff right now. But anyway, we all know about the fact that we're pumping more and more carbon dioxide and methane and sulfur and a bunch of other things into our atmosphere every year, right? Lead and arsenic. The big one that we talk about a lot is carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide is debatably the major byproduct of human industrial civilization. And it happens to be on this planet a particularly potent greenhouse gas that can sway and influence extremely big systems that we call our climate, which generally create the conditions by which we live on the surface of the planet Earth, which I have enjoyed so far. And, over the last 50 years, a lot more dialogue than there used to be about the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and also a lot more dialogue than there used to be about how insignificant it is that there is more and more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So a while ago, I was thinking this climate change thing is a big deal. This like global warming by carbon dioxide, methane, and a bunch of other gases thing is a big deal. I wonder if there's any other side to it that we haven't talked about yet. And I've been reading about a couple of like optimistic sides of global warming that are like, depending on how you want to read them politically, they're either like kind of enlightening or very disturbing, that people are like calculating the empirical like pleasure benefit of the deaths and displacement of billions of people. Anyway, your plants will grow bigger. More carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, in a warmer atmosphere, plants go faster, sequester carbon dioxide faster. Maybe there's sort of a cancel out there. And I'd heard a bunch of stories like that like, although the ocean is acidifying, Plants and jungles and peat bogs are forming faster than ever. And in a warming world, there will be more forest and a greater opportunity for the rise of biodiversity, so on. And I found a couple of National Institute of Health and NHS reports from the 2010s. It's a trend, I suppose, but I'm confirming it by virtue of a signal of the effects of carbon dioxide exposure on human cognition. And they did this report, and it was a medical science research report. So it's we've always known that if you put someone in a carbon dioxide environment of this saturation, they will die. However, what was not clear until fairly recently is what happens to people along the way. So currently we're at, I'm going to Google it right now. It's our current atmospheric greenhouse gas concentration. CO2 concentration parts per million right now. We're at 407 right now. I think that's so that's not right now. That's 2 years ago, the average was 407. And we've seen that number a lot, right? Everyone's seen that number. And the really, really good news is that adult human beings don't tend to start to exhibit the cognitive decline that comes with an increased carbon dioxide saturation in the atmosphere until 5 times where we are now. So nightmare scenario, there's no sulfur volcano dusting our way out of this. There's no sea blooming with the iron sulfates, or the planet's going to cook. We're going to turn into Venus. So that's great. And I thought, just because it would be kind of interesting, that CO2 concentration is highly variable on the planet's surface. And in fact, if you look at that number, 407.4 parts per million, that is either over a desert at high altitude, or it is over a rainforest at medium altitude. Because of humidity and atmospheric pressure, they account for them differently. But that number never comes from the sidewalk in a city. And so I started thinking, I wonder how different it is. Because I know about the urban heat island, and cities are warmer than the surrounding area. I wonder if they have more carbon dioxide too, and you're goddamn right they do. A sidewalk at King and Bay, near where I work, can have 50 to 60% more carbon dioxide in the air than the parts per million average for the planet Earth.
Right.
And if I went to a very polluted city in another part of the world, it could be double. It could be 900 or 1,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Still not at the level where people are starting to get noticeably dumb, idiocracy kind of dumb. But here's the kicker. When you're inside, the built environment is optimized to keep carbon dioxide levels below what will kill you. And they're really good at that. And you probably never die of carbon dioxide poisoning in a building. However, they're not designed for the gray area in between 0 and 2,500 parts per million. And if you look at what the little numbers on my little thing say, it's the day I don't have it because I've come to the office rather than home. The carbon dioxide levels in my office building, which is a fancy, most expensive rent per square foot in Canada, I believe, are 1,800 parts per million. When I go to work, what the scientists from the NIH and the NHS are suggesting is that my cognitive capacity should be expected to drop by 10 to 30% at work. Isn't that alarming?
That is alarming. And so that is for the time while you're exposed.
That is for the time while I'm exposed. And there isn't yet clarity on what the chronic impacts of that are per se down the road. Probably nothing. And the other nice thing about it is that fetal brain development is in no way affected by carbon dioxide rise. This is a thing that happens to the developed brain doing its job. Carbon dioxide regulates that. Mm-hmm. And so as our outdoor environments get more carbony, the indoor environments will also become more carbony. However, they are already 2 to 5 times more carbony than outside and approaching or at the threshold where cognitive decline can be expected. So two things to this signal interest me. 1, wow, no wonder I like working from home so much. 2, maybe the reason we suck at fighting climate change is because we're getting dumber every single year because it's getting worse. Think about that feedback loop and get ready to stay up at night a few times. Because that's sort of been the signal. The little line on this $100 thing I bought from Amazon, a CO2 detector, became the signal that I cannot stop thinking about.
But this signal is a bit of a theory.
That's the conspiracy theory end of the spectrum.
The inside numbing.
But the signal is real. My office is 1,800 parts per million. The street corner is 1,200, and the Amazon rainforest is 4.
Trevor, what floor are you on?
34th floor.
Isn't it true that CO2 is actually quite heavy and sinks to the bottom?
It could be even worse in the lobby. I haven't looked at that. I'll go back down into the food court. It's also much better ventilated down there, so I feel like there may be a trade-off. Like it's a 50-foot ceiling, and they're moving tons of air, and there's air exchange with the outside world. But up here, there's not. We're effectively in an aquarium. other than the elevator shafts. That's the only air connection.
Get more snake plants.
Yeah, the snake plants are good. Yucca and snake plants. Like there's a lot out there on like what's in a LEED gold building, what's in the air. And other buildings, the older they are, the less information there is. And they were doing some like benchmarking on like different kinds of buildings in different parts of the United States built at different points in time from different materials. What are like the indoor air quality profiles for them? And some of them will kill you. like the radioactive lime dust and stuff.
Right. For me, the signal here is I'm very interested in just environments in general where my cognitive function increases or decreases, and what does that mean, and what kind of work am I doing there, and why, and do I even want to be in those places at all? Would it be all right sometimes for that to happen? I'm very curious about that, about like the health effects of this. If like cognitive function kind of goes down, is that okay for your longer term cognitive function?
Decision making is compromised. So there you go.
In what way?
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Your ability to evaluate choices and make a decision, like manually make a decision between two choices, is the fastest thing that declines. Your willingness to like linger on a decision and just like think about it for 5 minutes is what increases. To be like, I don't need to make a decision.
I argue that means you're smarter. But...
yeah, maybe.
Have you guys has everybody been wearing masks when you go outside?
I was just wearing one,
Mine's over here.
Okay, so I bought a mask that my friend made, and I posted it on Instagram being like, thanks to my friend for making this mask, whatever, right? This is like, it's a pretty mask. It's not like it's not like, the regular mask. So my friend messages me and she's just like, girl, don't wear the masks. No matter what they tell you, don't wear the mask. She's a conspiracy theorist though.
Wait, the same girl who made the mask?
No, another girl commented on my picture being like, don't wear the masks. And then I was just like, what? Why not? She was like, because carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide poisoning. Like these masks that are made out of very thick material are like blocking your ability to take in as much oxygen as you need. They
do block the amount of air that comes in, but they don't block the chemical composition of that air. It's the same air as on the outside, there's just less of it coming in. But that's a thing. That's why the runners in my neighborhood aren't wearing masks. They're like, how would I do that?
There must be some masks that are...
There's for sure terrible ones out there.
Well, Trevor, when your colleagues start coming back to work, just, let them know, don't wear the masks indoors at the top of the building, because at that point, you're literally...
You're at risk of stupidity. You're at risk of being a real dummy. Or at least we shouldn't expect you to make any decisions.
I wonder if the rate of sort of diffusion of CO2 and oxygen is different, and which might actually increase the concentration of CO2.
Through a mask?
Through a mask, yeah. I don't know.
It might be a little different.
Yeah, carbon dioxide is much heavier than oxygen.
It might be a bit different.
And I wonder if it changes the sort of concentration changes the sort of ratio between oxygen and CO2 that you're breathing in, because some of it is just like stays behind or something.
In SARS, I was like an emergency room triage specialist. They called us specialists, which was very flattering for a 20-year-old with no medical background. To like ask people who had cut their finger off on the lawnmower if they had been to China in the last 48 hours. We were all decked out in like the full PPE suits and footwear and gloves and little mask and big mask and guard.
Wow.
And I swore that I was dipping in and out of consciousness those days. So there must be, like, certainly to layers of clothes will do that. Will trap carbon, like sheets will trap carbon dioxide. So I imagine as soon as you got more than one layer, like even if it's a cotton insert, you're probably changing the composition of the air. Maybe I spoke too soon earlier.
Yeah. Okay, so if you like practice being in an environment which is like low CO2, and then go and like operate in an environment which is, oxygen rich, I wonder if your cognitive function actually increases, which is similar to like basically like hyperbaric training that happens if we're
there was something about that. It was to do with how CO2 and oxygen don't neatly displace each other from the air. Yeah. So a spike in CO2 doesn't mean there's less oxygen. The oxygen you need is still all there. You may have to breathe a bit more to get what you need. The concentration is the same. I think it's nitrogen that is displaced.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fun other fact that's related to this, which I just remembered, is that when you feel out of breath, it's not actually because you've run out of oxygen. It's because of the increased concentration of CO2 in your lungs.
Yeah.
Which is, a bit unintuitive. And so you can actually like suffocate with just being in a room full of nitrogen with no oxygen at all. because your body just thinks that, you're getting your full breath of air.
Well, and you're getting whatever, 78% of it is the same.
Yeah.
Somebody told me that when I was a kid, I think, and I had like a nightmare about that, about being in a room where you can breathe, but you're not breathing air.
You're not breathing air, yeah.
Yeah, that's freaky.
So Udit, is this a signal or a noise? The inside numbing. That's what I've come to call it.
I think it's a signal of the awareness of like design of built environments, and especially inside. And
Trevor's awareness of it, or
our awareness,
something that's going on in Trevor's mind is cognitive capacity.
I think our awareness in general, because I think we've already related this to COVID, but there's this bigger sort of like other like phenomena that we can relate it to, for example, climate change as well.
Okay, but I'll just signal the noise.
I like the way that you got there and the way that it's like through a series of displacements and then a literal, like, I don't know what to call it, device that's monitoring the actual levels.
A signal.
Literally a signal.
Pure signal.
Signals.
Pure signal.
And I agree with Udit and what Rob said earlier too, just like a general like question of like what the built environment and the atmosphere in general, how that composes into how we think and act in the world. I'm not knowing what the studies and how they thought about what decision making and intelligence like consists of. I wouldn't jump to conclusions not having seen what that is, because I just think it's quite, maybe there's certain things that people do better, maybe there's things that people do worse, like and how do you control, there's so many variables at play, like
I'll send the links.
Yeah.
It's like memorization, like rote memorization of numbers, words, and a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
On the memory, and then decision making is like the time it takes you to make a decision to your expressed state of like to say like, yeah, I made the decision.
Yeah.
Well, maybe slowing everybody down is probably a good thing.
Yeah, maybe it's like slow people.
Just
slow
a better
food,
decision.
slow people, slow gas.
Slow decision.
There's interesting like metaphoric resonances with just like the birth of modernism in architecture too, which was like obsessed with like fresh air and the connection between like air and light and health. It's not to say that they're wrong, but it's playing into a lineage of that kind of way of thinking.
Yeah, the lineage of like miasma.
Yeah.
And like there are particles, there's young spores in the air, and the spores take your smarts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Call Jon Snow. Get him build a well, build an oxygen well, man.
Trying to think of like what other things you can modulate through the chemical composition of air,
Yeah,
being able
this was the gateway drug for me. Is I was like, oh yeah, the atmosphere is a mixture of gases, and you could change them all the time. You could change them 100 different ways without killing anybody. And I wonder what would happen.
All right, Udit, what is your weakest signal?
So this is also like veering towards conspiracy theory a bit.
Right. Make me look good. Make me look good, Udit.
So I've been getting these repeated ads. They're not really ads. They're actually like a repeat sort of news suggestions for this exactly same news article. When you like open you'll be reading a news article and at the bottom they have like all these outbrain suggestions. Mm-hmm. And I keep getting the same one. And the headline is, I'll read it out. Canadian casino CEO fired after a $700,000 mistake. And it starts with, I'll read out a bit of the news because I clicked on it and was curious. So it says, trusted online casino operator, Europa Casino Inc., and it has a NASDAQ symbol, which is CSNRM. I looked it up, but it doesn't exist, has made a costly mistake after launching their online casino in Canada that caused the company to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars to its players. This glitch has already lost them close to $700,000 in free spins and cash prizes, and the loss is going to continue to increase until 26th May 2020, which is tomorrow, when their new customer agreement takes place or takes into effect. And then if you read the article, it goes on to say that the problem was started because of a typo in their current customer agreement that basically gave away free credits to new users when they sign up. And in fact, there's no way to fix the typo, and they are going to continue to honor it because of strict gambling laws in Canada, which require casino companies to notify their customers seven days in advance before changing their terms and conditions. Like, I thought it was a scam, but I wasn't quite sure. So I went down a bit of a rabbit hole looking for what this might be. And I found basically the equivalent of the same news article written in multiple different languages. So I found one in German, I found one in Arabic, and I found a bunch of them in different regional Indian languages. Whoa. And each one of these articles is localized to that audience. So I can read Hindi, so I was reading the Hindi ones, and they've changed the names, Like they have like specific details about places, which are like slightly changed as well. So Indian story, for example, they talk about the lucky individual who discovered the loophole. And they've changed the name from the Canadian one, which is Michael McGee, to Atanu Dinesh, which is like an Indian name, of course. Oh yeah, and also there are a whole bunch of Medium posts that are talking about this article, but like talking about how it worked for them when they went and signed up and they made money off of it. Really? And there's like likes on the Medium post, like hundreds of likes, and there are comments about how the loophole worked as well.
Is it a rogue AI? Is this the singularity?
Well, that's the thing. I don't really know what it is, but I know that it's super sophisticated. It's localized. Like it's extremely organized in that, like, in the sense that someone has like these coordinated bots that are like liking and like upvoting and commenting on these Medium posts and these like news stories. So it's like organized, automated, localized, and I don't really know what it is and like who's funding this and where it's coming from. I would like to think that it's just like an advertising tactic or like a way to like divert new users or capture users or like get new signups into this gambling service because people are like gonna like click through and be like, oh, I want to make this money or whatever. But as a signal, the thing that stood out to me is the title of like these news stories, which is not, hey, click on like, here's how you can make money or whatever, which would be like the traditional way of like, you know, doing a scam. It's CEO fired because of his incompetence, which is like, you know, it's like
it's like a Washington Post headline.
Yeah, it's like a Washington Post headline. They thought through what the psychology of like the people who clicking through is.
I feel like it's a pity play.
Is it a pity
You're
play?
like, I wanna know, who is this person? What did they do? Did they really do something wrong?
Yeah, maybe. This is the thing that I'm like trying to figure out. Like, what is it that they're trying to do? Are they trying to capitalize on this like populist anti-CEO rhetoric right now? And people are like, oh yeah, fuck the CEO. Yeah. Like he made a mistake. I want to go and make money.
I think this is the scamification. Like, I think that's it. It's like, this is like, oh, this time, this loophole, you can stick it to the big casinos and this like CEO got fired. And there's all these things that people kind of appeals right now, I think, to people and feeling to get in. But I think also it's just like this crazy perpetuation of this like lottery narrative, right? Of this like, oh, there's a way to beat the system, right? It's a kind of like been done in a way so like you can actually overcome all of the shit that's keeping you down.
This is very layered. This is like the Christopher Nolan movie of email scam marketing. And
I think like done in this sort of like chaotic, weaponized news style that has been happening now, you know, since 2015, 16 or whatever, where it's very indirect in terms of like the behaviors that it's trying to get out of you.
Yeah, I like that way of thinking about it. It's that you click through because you want to break free from the rigged system, all the while the whole thing is rigged to begin with by the casino, who's like just trying to get new customers to sign up to the service because they think they might win some money.
It could even not be by that casino or whatever. That casino.
Oh yeah. This could go real wide.
It could be the casino business, right? It could be the whole industry or something. Like the point is just to get you gambling at all, and which has always been like, this is 1984, right? Like this.
It's a manufacturing discontent. Yeah, it's all of this is interesting because like when I was looking at like the casino companies that all of these articles have, a lot of them are different. They're not even the same company, but they all have the same like NASDAQ code, which doesn't exist. It's always like CSNRM. But the cool thing with the fact that they've like reused the same NASDAQ, the stock code or whatever, is that it's actually becomes like a really easy referent to all of these news articles. Like you can like just search for that literal phrase, NASDAQ, CSNRM, and find every single one of these articles. Because like across all the different languages.
That was your clue.
That was my clue. That's how I found it.
Cipher. Yeah. I think that maybe that's your signal. I think maybe the acronym is the signal. In the spirit of the conspiracy theory, we should keep an eye out for those numbers and letters again.
I'm going to read the signal as like this, what I call scamification. This like, we love a good scammer. Like that's the way the world is kind of now. And it's like, if you can run this scam, take this loophole, that's fine. You should take advantage of it. Go for it. You can still make some money here.
Is that a Rob Bolton original?
Which one, the scamification?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sort of came up when we were discussing a while back about what comes after gamification.
I love this one because it's a meta scam, right? Like you think you're scamming this thing, but like actually it's the casino that's scamming you.
And we love the casino for it. Yeah. Good for them.
It's hilarious. It's so funny.
The better scammer won. Yeah.
It's in the universe of 4D chess. This is like the perfect scam.
All right, well, signal. Fathers, signal or noise?
Noise.
No,
I think it's just, it feels like it's part of the scam itself doesn't even sound that different for me. It's like, it's not even like going that far in certain sense.
It's like the next evolution of the Nigerian prince.
Yeah, it's a different branch, I think. It's a different kind of scam. I don't even know if it counts as a scam, actually.
Yeah, I don't know either. That's what I was just thinking, is I don't think it is a scam. Unless it's 3 layers down and we haven't gotten to it yet.
But it's
just viral marketing tactics.
Yeah, it's just branding.
Yeah, like every brand does this.
Yeah,
but it's weird. But it's very weird. It's a weird way to do branding. Is to like auto-generate dissent and discontent social activism campaigns. I guess it all adds up though. And I guess that isn't actually all that weird. Now that I say that, that's what every advertiser in the world is doing.
But what is the entity that is branding itself through this? That's the thing that's
what I was wondering.
Ontario Gaming Board.
Whoever owns all these like online platforms, right? The online casinos or whatever.
These are ads, right? Isn't it?
No, they're news stories and Medium posts.
Yeah,
they're like the weird, shifty-looking ones at the bottom.
Quasi-Content.
Yeah, the Outbrain.
Quasi-Content is good. But I wondered.
Yeah, but they're taking up ad space, though, right? As in, like that's
no, it's content space.
Okay.
It's not a news. It's like sometimes you'd find like a BBC article on the Outbrain at the bottom as well.
Right.
Okay.
My super hot take is going to be that this is a branding and growth hacking effort by the Maltese government because most of these gambling websites are based out of Malta.
Signal or noise, Trevor?
I want it to be a conspiracy theory signal, but I think it's noise. But if it's the rogue AI trying to signal us by like pulsing acronyms on our, I'm very interested.
I like that idea too.
I'm very interested.
The article, you said it's like nearly the same in English and in other languages, right? What is the political message that you're getting from the content?
I had that question too. What is different in a different way in each version?
In what direction are they leaning? What are they trying to make you think?
I haven't read them closely enough to notice subtle differences, but like they're all about like how the CEO fucked up. Like that is like the core to all of these.
Right. I'm going to say a noisy signal.
Noisy signal.
I would say it's sort of something that is like almost literally noise. So it's this noise of signal. That's a valid question.
Yeah, no, it's literally noise.
That's where signals like to hide out. That's how they pounce on their prey.
But I kind of also wonder about the idea of this just like mean innocuous fake news, AI generated writing to get clicks. There's like nothing to it. It's just something that's supposed to work well. And so algorithm was like, yeah,
you know what?
Pump this around.
Like every other advertising project in history, we can gauge its efficacy by whether or not we're sitting here talking about it.
Us though.
It works. Intended or not, it worked.
Valdez, what's your weakest signal?
Okay, so I came across a syllabus. So that's going to be my signal, like a reading list and also like a certain kind of emergent online infrastructure for something called pirate care. And it fits into all this talk around the care economy that we've been like chatting about here and there over like the last few months or years or whatnot. And this idea of like this Venn diagram of like care and piracy increasingly overlapping. And the idea behind the thesis of the syllabus is that so many elements of just basic care infrastructure are being criminalized in certain ways. And so you can think of like the refugee crisis a few years ago of like boats coming across the Mediterranean that the Italian government put in a order that you couldn't even like respond to like an SOS call, they weren't actually allowed to do that, but they weren't allowed to dock in Italian ports. There's things around like abortions and being able to get abortions and the rise of things like Women on Waves that does like drone and different forms of like on sea abortion as a form of like piracy care activism. They've been around since like 2016 or so, at least. One of the things that's interesting in this one is sometimes when I hear the word care economy, I'm just like, oh yeah, like you're a progressive. Like it's so easy to place where you're going to be, you know, the kind of affective disposition of somebody who cares about care is very like almost identity politics left, like, which to me is a form I don't like as much. But then one of the examples I came across actually like broke that idea. And it's that people are also frustrated with the like bureaucratic regime of the contemporary moment. And so there's the rise of like pirate kindergartens in Italy, where because there's so much bureaucratization around getting credentialed to like take care of somebody's kids, people are forming these underground networks of like pirate kindergartens where they basically like don't follow the state guidelines of who is credited and not credited. So I think that I see as like one element of potentially the signal and this overlap of care and piracy is that like the care economy that I used to think of as more of like an identity left politics is like maybe a little different than I would have thought. I don't know. I don't even know if I'm changing my like opinion about it or anything.
So what's the piracy? Because I understand the other meaning of piracy to be like a robbing and pillaging kind of thing, and this sounds more like homebrew than robbing and pillaging.
So I think the tech side is part of it. It's not one that I spoke about. They themselves call themselves like amateur librarians and like forming pirate libraries because it's a syllabus. So they're like taking all these, which is in like the standard like Aaron Schwartz style, like breaking of documents and all of the rights management software that like prevents their use or whatever, institutional preventions. So that's like part of the story. I think the idea, maybe I need like more examples of like where care is being prevented by certain kinds of either like corporate or state actors. And that's the part where they're like, oh, well, we don't. So the bureaucratization idea of like the kindergarten's not being allowed because you need to have potentially some kind of like ridiculous certification. If
it's piracy in the Aaron Schwartz sort of sense, is it just basically like the cypherpunk movement applied to like the care economy in some sense?
Literally, is it the same people?
Yeah. Is there like an overlap between like people using cryptography and things like that for like making these syllabus like free and removable from the internet or something like that?
I think it's more this like contemporary like Renaissance style people who you see more and more of, who are like part of like the art world, but they're also very tech savvy and maybe they have some like activist stream in them. Like, but they're not. I would not think of it as cypherpunk.
This idea when you were talking about like pirate kindergartens, and I immediately took it to like bootlegging kindergarten. Is this related, this concept? Because it kind of, the signal for me, it was like this creative pathway to go down of like, what can we pirate that we don't normally think about pirating? And certainly care is one thing where it's like, yeah, there's all these licenses and certifications that are required. And then there are people who have these skills and capabilities who don't have those for whatever reasons, or don't have them locally and could be able to provide these services or offer these services under a pirated, whatever it is, you know?
It's fairly obvious to me what pirate treatment looks like. Because I do enough work and read enough stuff about what goes on in the pharma industry that like, if you're involved in the treatment of people, you are a victim to piracy. Heavily already. But care, that's very interesting.
Yeah. All these examples were ones that I'd come across before. But when you name this thing, like care and piracy brought together, then it becomes self-fulfilling, generative type of like what you were saying. Like you can think of new ways to apply this idea into new domains. It's like a creative exercise, you know, like retroactively naming these things as belonging to a lineage.
What you're talking about is making me think about how badly the COVID outbreak has been impacting old folks' homes and the extent to which women are the ones who work in these spaces. My mom works in a long-term care facility. Well, my mom manages a food and nutrition department. And when things started getting real, all of her workers started quitting. So they were extremely understaffed. And they had like 90 or 100 residents to be feeding and to be changing and to be cleaning up after and stuff like that. And so all my mom's regular workers went AWOL. And then they started bringing in a bunch of these kind of under-certified, but we're not really talking about it, people who are willing to work in these homes. And a lot of them were immigrant women who didn't necessarily have like the right qualifications to be doing that work, but they really needed people to come in and do this work.
That was the job I took in SARS too. We can't get healthcare professionals to come to work. So what if we pay you $30 to pretend to be someone who knows what's going on?
Exactly.
But there's a relationship there, I think. And you can see how, if that type of thing can happen, then why not set up the pirate old folks home, you know, without the qualifications, and just, can you be trusted enough without certifications?
At this point, are the consequences of what happens in a pirate long-term care facility going to be any worse than what happens in 80% of the long-term care facilities in America in the last 2 months?
It might be way better.
It might only be better.
But the other thing this took me to is this idea of like piracy as enterprise. And wasn't Uber like kind of pirate taxis at the beginning? That's sort of also what a lot of these things, like is it this pirate kindergarten or, you know, any of these things are kind of enterprises.
I don't like the word pirate.
No, I don't feel like it's a good word anymore. I feel like the last time I remember.
Last time was good when Johnny Depp was doing.
Being a good thing, yeah. It's either Johnny Depp or it's like some story of the Macintosh team at Apple in the early 80s. And they're like, we're pirates. We're going to revolutionize the personal computer. The fire in the valley, man. And other than that, I have mostly bad evocations.
Mostly bad. What would be a better term? Because alternative is too bland. And
I mean, open care is kind of sounds like a DNS service.
What if we called it like Robin Hood Care?
2.0 is too that's
or fucking homeschooling. Legitimate just homeschooling.
Sure.
Like, or you know, like a
underground
little
is kind
teeny
of
Montessori.
I kind of like alt care.
Alt is another word.
Alt's gotten a bad rep lately.
I like that it's called piracy, actually. I think it's provocative. I think it's interesting.
I sort of feel the same way.
Putting a stake in
it is. Here we are
like
talking about it. So it did work. It did work like the CEOs and the casinos.
I also think you guys don't necessarily have the most like long-term view of piracy, because maroon colonies and things like this that were like pirate based in the like 1700s in the New World, they've been like looked at by different kinds of mostly like anarchist groups as like utopias that actually existed. They were like very democratic,
economically integrated utopias.
Yeah.
I don't know about all that. You see, the thing is that pirates were heavily involved in the shipment of like, you know, people, you know, and so like from some perspectives, you could see like they were breaking away from like European monarchies and building their own lives, but they were still engaging in like the economic heyday of the day, you know, which was literally enslaving people and stuff. And I think that's where my ear of the word pirate comes from, because it's important for people to obviously, you know, not conform, but at the same time,
there's a lot of different pirates that you could point to.
I guess that's a part of my angle is the pirates aren't always bad. It isn't always clear who the pirates like. The pirates tend to be a little flexible in terms of who they will pirate. They're opportunists. They're entrepreneurial opportunists, and so it's a tricky thing to do. It's a tricky thing to put around a community. Signal for sure.
I would just say that the slave trade was like a highly regulated, like state-driven affair, and not like an anarchic kind of piracy-driven thing. There was like a lot of like
if you look into it, there's a lot of like people who were just doing things rogue and stealing whole ships full of people.
Well, yeah. Once governments have regulated things, it becomes easier to do illegal versions of them because the thing's already happening. We're at the blanket statement portion of my presence on your show. Good, bad. We've got 5 minutes.
Signal Illinois.
I like it. It's a signal.
I think
signal.
I would say it's a signal, but in the sense that Val said it's a signal, which is that I think retrospectively, once you put a term around it, I think it's a generative tool, and we can think of other ways to apply this term.
It wasn't really about the pirate, like the pirate kindergarten is only one part of it. We're talking about like the extension of the care economy in general and like new examples of it, of how people are like breaking away from the system and creating their own models of doing things, right?
I mean, childcare is one of the things that happens in gray / black market, I guess you could call it, ways like all the time. It's so normal. No one would even blink an eye about that idea, right? Like,
babysitters.
Yeah, babysitters.
Homeschooling.
The naming is kind of significant in that way, whereas because like some examples of this are so normal, part of accepted everyday life that you wouldn't even think to name them, like something like piracy.
That's a part of what I was getting stuck on too, is that like in some ways pirates and piracy, there's a bit of a gulf there that maybe there wasn't always, where there's more flexibility and fluidity in those words than there used to be when they were maybe closer together.
In the kindergarten example, what is being pirated?
Well, it's because you need to have a certain kind of certification in order to set up that involves paperwork and fees and things.
The delivery of care system is being pirated.
Yeah.
And you could pirate the education as well, or you could...
And the content, And the tools, you could, cracked Blackboard and stuff. That's going to save you a lot of money.
Yeah. My weakest signal this week is something that I don't think pirates have a lot of. It's receipts. So the idea of receipts in this case being like a persistent meme that has been, and slang usage of the word receipt as a kind of record, and usually in the phrases, either I got the receipts or show me the receipts. So you either kind of have the receipts or you don't. But when people invoke receipts, they're basically saying like, I've got the evidence, I've got proof, I've got a record of this that happened, or they're in denial. And so this has been, I say, a persistent meme because I'm seeing it come up a lot lately. I'm seeing it in song lyrics. When I did like a little search of it, especially it's being used throughout the sort of reality TV, The Bachelor, The Real Housewives sort of world. And what's interesting there is there's a sort of like rogue record keeping being done by characters on these shows. So they take out their phones or they set up their own cameras because while cameras aren't running, they want to prove that something happened and record something that happened and then have a receipt for that. And so there's a bunch of things like I wonder what this represents. Oh, firstly, I'll give you the origin, if anyone doesn't know, is actually from Whitney Houston in an interview a long time ago. And she's asked about doing her like $750,000 drug habit. And she's like, show me the receipts, like, kind of tongue in cheek, because like everybody knows that she had this drug habit. And she's like, and she's just kind of like, yeah, show me the receipts. I think there's a bunch of things it signals. And one is just like a kind of gotcha culture. That's like people, you were at Trinity Bellwood's not social distancing. I got the receipts, like, and this kind of like culture of recording and citizen surveillance on each other and snitching and all like.
Oh, and the proximity-based Google, Apple API sensing stuff. I got the receipts. I wasn't there.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of these different
kinds of contact tracing.
Contact tracing would be
contact tracing. Yeah.
I mean, often they take the form as like screenshots of tweets, of like Instagram posts, of text messages, and often like text messages that are meant to be in privacy and confidence, whatever, and frequently about catching people doing things that are problematic. There's I think a certain type of like content, but it seems to be becoming more mainstream as a term, and it's an interesting one because it's a particular like record of a transaction that has now come to mean so much more and seems to really like represent certain aspects of culture and where it's going.
I don't know if what trends on my Twitter is what trends on you guys' Twitter. What trend on my Twitter last few days is this artist named Doja Cat.
Love Doja Cat.
I love her too. I really love her. I just spent the last 3 weeks telling everybody how much I love this girl. But she was accused of like going on these tiny chats and like specifically alt-right incel tiny chats and stripping for the men there.
Oh no.
I know.
Well, so maybe it was art. Maybe it was art. But
she's draining them of their resources.
Yeah, maybe it was art.
But the point is that like people had receipts. People had like these screenshots of her ass, and like a whole bunch of guys being like, yeah, like is her in the middle, and then like talk about the frames. It's like literally like a Brady Bunch, just like a bunch of incels and her in the middle, half naked. Her at home, regular on a tiny chat with a bunch of incels. So, but that was the receipt of the week on Twitter.
Right. There you go. Receipt of the week.
Receipt of the week.
The other one I saw recently was RuPaul apparently has a fracking empire on the Wyoming ranch.
Did you make that up right now?
I read it today.
He's got the receipts.
Has a fracking empire.
And the article said, we've got the receipts. I haven't checked the receipts, but
that's alarming.
That's the headline I saw. I just Googled news receipts, and that was one that came up.
You could have made that up, and I would have believed that you made it up. 100%.
Yeah, and the NASDAQ symbol is.
Yeah, and it's got the CSVND.
Do you think we'll like ever organize receipts and have like receipt libraries? You know, like the way WikiLeaks or something is kind of just like a giant receipt library.
It's called the Shade Room.
What's the Shade Room?
It's an Instagram platform that just keeps receipts on anybody. Yeah, like TMZ. TMZ is like
there's receipts. Yeah, there's a couple like different live journals and Tumblrs over the past 4 or 5 years that are kind of like, one is called Your Fave is Problematic, and it's like receipts of celebrities saying, but yeah, it's sort of been a thing about just catching people doing these or saying things or whatever that they're to be ashamed of, I guess.
You know what though? I was like, where's the forgiveness? Like, where's the love? I don't know. I just like leave Doja Cat alone. You know, I mean, like she fucked up. Don't cancel her. Anyway.
Well, she might be doing it right now, Asia. She might be with the incels right now.
She might be. But you know what? She issued a Twitter apology being like,
Okay.
I should know better. And you know what? If you feel like you should know better, don't worry, girl, I forgive you. I'm still
Why don't you say so?
Yeah. Well, so there. But I mean,
I forgive you.
I think that's the point. It's accountability is part of this receipt signal, right? But it's also like this call-out culture for sure.
Have any of you ever been receipted? Have you ever been asked to present receipts? Have you had receipts presented to you?
The way I think about it would be within things like debates and things like that, where people and you just said this or whatever. And it happens to me all the time because I love ambiguity.
Yeah, but we sold truth at the garage sale last spring. We don't have that anymore.
We'll post truth now, right?
The way I hear the word receipts in my circles is the term red receipts, which is like the the blue check marks that you have when you send a message. And like it does come up where it's like, oh, I got the red receipts. Like I know you've read my message and you're fucking reply. Like you saw it, but you haven't replied.
There's something there that's around like distrusting authority and taking the power out of celebrity that was sort of part of this originally, but then for me it's sort of become just something that's representative of like everybody wanting to get each other and say gotcha and snitch on each other and put each other out there constantly. But
do you think it's like a thirst for truth in a post-truth society?
I think
these are all we have.
I think it's like
thirst for like just people love shaming each other these days.
Yeah, a thirst for truth and vengeance at any cost.
Yeah.
I think the automation of it is a natural extension of everything. That like, why do we need people don't act fast enough to meaningfully capture all the inappropriate moments that get deleted immediately. We should have specialized subroutines that do this. They go look for embarrassing moments and capture them and let their value accrue.
Yeah. I mean, I think it has some pink police state effects and stuff too. This idea that like anyone's going to have receipts of whatever. And so what are you going to be willing to say? Are you willing to test certain ideas? I mean, on this broadcast, the whole point is that we're talking about things we don't know anything about. And taken out of context, like, I think that's the other point, is that these receipts are not really proof a lot of times because...
No, that's the thing. The restaurant receipt is transactional.
Yeah.
It works for the restaurant and the customer. It's like we can both agree. We have a shared record of a transaction.
We each have a copy.
But this kind of receipt, this is like the multi-factor authenticated or unauthenticatable receipt.
But there's no contract involved the way that
it's a receipt without a contract.
It has a contract involved implicitly, right?
It could be, you know what this could be? This could be pirate receipts.
These are pirated receipts.
This is pirated receipts.
Pirated in that, like, they're not necessarily clear. Or like,
they're not necessarily good. They could be like outlaws, criminals, and unethical monsters. But that's not stopping them from doing the thing, capturing the thing in order to make the person they want to feel the thing.
Yeah. So for me, it's a signal. What do you guys think? It's a signal, or
what was the signal itself? Where did you get that from? It wasn't Whitney Houston. It was
the RuPaul headline.
Okay.
But it's the point that they said we've got the receipts for RuPaul's fracking empire in Wyoming.
Signal.
Yeah, it's a signal, but it's like, is it a signal or is it already a trend?
For me, it's a very from later signal. I've been waiting for some blanket statement to make about the people who I don't work with. From what I've gathered so far, it's very from later signal. It's like you've taken something that on the surface is quite cosmetically simple, and you've opened it up and looked at a lot of the underpinnings and under the telescope and with the microscope, and you've attached some cultural significance and some creative vectors for your signal. Like of all the vectors in signal libraries and trend decks, you don't usually see RuPaul and Whitney Houston.
You don't see nearly enough memes, I don't think, but I think...
not nearly enough memes.
You could say that this is like metonymy or something. This is a great example of like the thing stands in for our world here because it represents so much. But I also think it represents where things are rapidly going and that this has been picking up pace over the past 4 or 5 years. So by the way, the Whitney Houston thing was like in the early 2000s. It picked up a lot in 2016 in a Kanye West, Taylor Swift exchange that was, I won't get into, but 2016, an interesting year for receipts as well, because you also have all of these brutal police attacks on Black men that were caught on tape. And so there was sort of like this like receipt moment, and since then it's gone in different ways. And that's where I say like there's here's a receipt around, and it's around distrust in authority, whether that be celebrity or whether that be police or what, or where are the receipts for what you're accusing me of? It's still a distrust in authority. but it's gone somewhere else, I think, where it's almost become its own authority, the culture of like receipts and kind of citizen surveillance on each other in a way that doesn't really protect each other in a lot of cases. Signal noise.
I think it's an index to a change that has already happened. I think it's interesting that it emerged with Whitney Houston, using it as a rhetorical device to mess with people and like playfully using this idea of like, well, where's the proof? And if it was switching back to that, I would think of it as a signal or something. The way Trump is just like, you have all the receipts, but who cares? Like, I can say whatever I want to say because there's so much information out there that any kind of like receipt on me doesn't matter. Like in the flood of like outrage culture, it'll be gone tomorrow. Like the shame culture, I think, is like the thing we were getting at. And I don't know, I feel like that peaked for me like a few years ago. It's interesting that people are taking pleasure in it now, in this like way of talking about receipts at like an everyday, day-to-day level, like friend to friend or whatever. Like, oh, I have receipts on you.
That's the other thing about actual physical pieces of paper receipts, is that while they are these records of something that occurred, of an event that occurred in exchange, they are also ephemeral, disposable, impermanent garbage.
Eminently fakeable, ultimately disposable garbage.
Yeah.
The garbage
that carries
garbage.
over perfectly as well.
Yeah. I have a comic book that is printed on receipt paper so that every time you read it, it destroys itself slowly, like because of the exposure to light.
Ooh.
Well, there's an ephemeral signal.
Yeah. What do you think is a signal in noise?
I think it's like a continuation of the signal. Like I think like all the stuff that was happening on social media in the late aughts, early 2010s. So like the emergence of something like Snapchat, which has ephemeral messaging, and it's like it started to happen even more today. There's so many ephemeral chat applications, you know, like messages that don't ever like get stored in your phone or whatever. And so this sort of distrust of what people will do with information or can do with information was already there. So I think it's like interesting that we have like evolved language to be able to talk about these ideas of ephemerality and like proof and things like that.
You remind me that the notification that someone has screenshotted your Snap or Instagram is a very interesting form of receipt.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Yeah. All right. Well, sounds like you guys are about this as being an actual signal of where things are going. So like I always say, a weak signal is something that's not always taken seriously by your colleagues. Broadcast from later.